Hello, this is Christina Simmons with the Say Yes to Holiness podcast, and I am so very excited to have you with me today as I have conversation with a wonderful guest, Kelly Breaux. And Kelly lives in Breaux, Louisiana. Need to ask whether or not it's actually named after your family or not. Um, but she's also the co-founder of Redbird Ministries. And Redbird Ministries was one of the winners of the 2021 OSV Innovation Challenge. And what Redbird Ministries does is that it's an organization that systematically guides individuals and couples through the complexity and trauma that happens with the loss of a child. So Kelly, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here. That mission of Redbird Ministries sounds like it probably came out of your own personal journey. So is that the case?
That is the case, yes. So thank you again for inviting me to the podcast. And yeah, we are so excited to be one of the OSV Innovation Challenge winners. But yes, Redbird Ministries was born out of our pain. Whenever, when we do strategy planning, and we think of who we're serving and we create like this, I guess, username. The first time we ever did this, they asked me this. They were like, who is Redbird Ministries for? And I was like, Ryan and Kelly Breaux. It was what we needed desperately and could not find anywhere when we suffered our losses. So we lost 3 children. We have one living daughter named Estelle, and she's 12 years old. But our twins, I'll start there, were born in 2005. I experienced placental abruption at 28 weeks, so they had to take them early. Our son Talon died at 15 days old. He had contracted Pseudomonas sepsis. And Emma, she was doing well, very little. But the day that we buried Talon, we realized she had an infection too. And of course, when you lose a child, the fear of losing again is like a reality. And so I started to have anxiety and panic attacks. It was a very troubled time for my husband and I, just because, being so young, I was 25 years old, and having this huge responsibility to care for small babies was very overwhelming.
Yeah.
When we found out that Emma had an infection, I immediately thought that she would die too. But she didn't pass away from the infection. She actually recovered, but not without complications. So she developed 3 aneurysms in her vascular system. They had to fly her to Fort Worth, which was about 8 hours away from us, where she had cardiovascular surgery at 5 weeks old. She was very small. She was only 3.5 pounds at the time. It was a very risky surgery. She survived that. She came home about 3 days after her due date on 10 different medications and on oxygen 24 hours a day. And that's kind of when the anxiety and the depression really kicked in, because all of a sudden I was responsible to keep her alive. I felt ill-equipped, overwhelmed, did not know really what I was doing. I was scared that I would give her the wrong medicine. And with this responsibility, like I was saying, the anxiety was just very overwhelming to me. So that was like the first time that my husband and my OB talked me into going to see a therapist. I did not do it willingly. I didn't want or need help. No one ever wants to need help. But that was our reality at the time. And so I went begrudgingly. And I remember when I was sitting in the therapist's office, because I was convinced that I was going crazy, because this feeling of overwhelm, I had never experienced this before. And so I didn't know what anxiety was. I didn't know what depression was. So as soon as she told me, you're not clinically depressed, or you're not suffering from that, you're grieving, I remember looking at her and telling her, then you can't help me. And she told me, she was like, yes, I can. I was like, no, you haven't lost a child. And it was just my reality. I did take the medicine that her and my OB suggested. I did begin to take some anxiety medicine because that helped me to be able to take care of myself and to take care of Emma, who was so little. And as time passed, we were able to get into a routine of things. I knew what I was doing. Emma was growing. At 10 months old, she was able to come off her oxygen. And we were able to schedule her for her baptism. We were able to celebrate her first birthday. And then about 18 months old, when she started to walk, we realized that there was a complication that she had from surgery that we didn't know if it was going to be a little thing or if it's going to be a big thing. Her right iliac, which is where one of the aneurysms was located, had clotted off after surgery, and they couldn't remove it. And so from the time that she had the surgery till about 18 months old, what we realized during this time was that it had damaged her growth plate. And it was something that we didn't really know until that moment. And a couple months later, because we were seeing different orthopedic surgeons, but a couple months later, I remember one of the surgeons telling us that he thought that the only appropriate way to treat her is if we would amputate her right leg, which was the leg, right foot, which was the leg that the iliac had clotted off. Because the growth, they were charting it over time, the growth would be just too much to overcompensate. As she got older, she would start to have other issues like her hip damage and knee damage, and it just wouldn't give her the quality of life that she should have. And so I instantly rejected that. I was like, I can't do that to her. As a mother, all you want to do is protect your child. And that was my response to it. I didn't want her to go through that. And so I desperately tried to find another option. And we did. We found a doctor. He was in Baltimore at the time to be able to do a limb lengthening surgery. It was a series of 3 to 4 surgeries, depending on the success, but surgeries would have to take place during the biggest growth spurt of human development, which the next one was at 3.5 years old. Right. So that's what we did. We scheduled the surgery for the summer. I'm sorry, it was supposed to be at the beginning of 2009. Well, in the meantime, I got pregnant for my daughter, Estelle, who is 12 now. And it was bad timing. I had so much mixed emotions. It was so complicated, so many complicated feelings, because I was excited to get pregnant. Of course, I wanted another baby. I just didn't know how I was going to take care of a newborn and a daughter who was going to have so much medical attention. Because when she would have the surgery, she'd be in a wheelchair for 6 months. So we pushed back the surgery from January to July so that we could, for Estelle to be a little bit older. And that summer in 2009, when we were going to leave, probably about a month or 2 months before, I forgot to say this, her doctor moved from Baltimore to West Palm Beach, Florida. So we left Louisiana, drove to West Palm Beach, Florida, dropped off our stuff, and then took Emma and Estelle to Disney World. We said if we're this close, we're going to bring her to have fun. Yep. So that's what we did. We took her to Disney World. Well, that was the week before surgery. So from the time that we left Louisiana to the time that we arrived in West Palm Beach, went to Disney and came back, somewhere along the way, Emma contracted H1N1. And we did not know at the time. So she had her surgery, and that night she started having febrile seizures. And she was diagnosed, I think, on day 5, but on day 3 things got really, really bad. They thought that she was going to die. starting on about day 3. And finally on day 5, they moved her from West Palm Beach to Miami Children's to put her on an ECMO machine. And that's where she lived for 7 weeks. ECMO, I don't know how many, people or your listeners are familiar with ECMO is. It's a heart and lung machine. And what it's supposed to do is to give your heart and your lungs time to rest.
Right.
Average time that someone is supposed to be on it is less than 2 weeks. She was on it for 7 weeks. So the longer you're on it, the harder it is to get off, and it becomes a complication in itself to someone. And that's kind of what happened. And she would make little small improvements, but it was never enough to think that she would ever get off. And that date was September 10th of 2009. And that was the day that she died. And it was the most horrible day of my life, even after experiencing what we experienced with Talon. I believed that God was going to heal her. I didn't believe that God was going to take another child. And so I had not prepared myself for death. And not, when I prayed, I didn't pray for her to be healed, to go to heaven. I wanted her with me. And I remember after she passed away, that they wrapped her up in a sheet and they laid her on my lap, kind of like they did for the Blessed Mother. I was a living Pieta. And I remember just looking at her and just crying out to God. And it was just, the most loneliness that I've felt in a room full of people. I just felt so abandoned by him. And because everything we talk about with God is that he's good and he's loving and he's all knowing. And if he's good and he's loving and he's all knowing, why did he allow this to happen to me? Not once, but twice. And so my faith totally went out the window. I could no longer pray. Couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't remember to pay our bills, like simple things. Couldn't remember to pay our bills. I couldn't remember if I took my medicine. I couldn't remember if I brushed my teeth. Like everything people say about grief, I experienced and more. I'd never in my life had a chasm of faith like this moment. And it wasn't that I didn't believe in God, which is the crazy thing too. And I tell that to everybody. I just didn't believe he was good. I didn't believe that he loved me. I believe that other people could find healing. Other people was worthy of miracles that just I wasn't. My husband and I, we experienced the same trauma, but then we never really talked about it again. And so there was a lot of the feelings of emotional abandonment. I would get very angry at him for not wanting to talk about it, but he was just trying to protect me. Right. That's, after we found healing, I was like, why we didn't talk about that? And he, I was like, I felt like you didn't love our children, because he wouldn't cry around me. He was just trying to protect me from everything. And that was not the case at all. He tells me it was the opposite. I loved you so much. I was trying to protect you. But just in our inability to be able to communicate, there was so many things that fell apart. We almost lost our marriage, not in the context that we filed for divorce. It just got to a very scary place that it felt like that was our only option. Not that either one of us wanted it, but we just couldn't live like we were living. And things changed. I would say things changed probably when our daughter Estelle was about 4.5 years old. That's when it first started to change. And she started school at our parish, at our little church parish, the school. And they would go to mass on Thursdays. And so after Emma died, I had stopped going to mass because I would have flashbacks of the coffins. The baby's crying in church. I couldn't handle it. I would run out of church and just cry. And after a while, you just stop going.
Right.
And so when Estelle started back school, she would ask me to go to mass with her. And I was like, I don't want to go to mass with you. I don't want to step foot back into that place ever again. It was just a memory that I was not ready to revisit. And she would not stop. So one day I thought I would just go to shut her up. But the reality was the next Thursday, she kept asking. But after I stepped back into church, after I faced that fear, it wasn't so scary because 4.5 years had passed. And I was able to go back to that place. And I was able to continue to go back to church week by week. Like on Thursdays, I'd go with her, and it kind of started there. And then finally, over time, we would go, Ryan and I, and Estelle, on Sundays. So it was a sporadic thing on the weekends, but that's how I first started back into school. Into mass. And then a couple other things happened. That was in 2014. 2015, my mom passed away. And I wanted to have the whole funeral, vigil. I wanted to do all the things. So again, I was back into church in that same situation as I was when Emma died. And we did all the things for my mom. And then 6 months later, I had a friend who her and her daughter were in a car accident, and her daughter was killed. She was 10 years old. And that's kind of when my knees really hit the ground, because I had never had someone I was close to that had lost a child. So I ran to her side to try to comfort her, to try to console her as her friend. But I realized that she was not responding the same way that I was. She was not mad at the drunk driver. She was not angry at God. The day of her daughter's funeral, she was supposed to leave to make her Cursillo. I don't know if you know what Cursillo is.
Yep, very well.
She was supposed to leave to make her Cursillo. She went the next time it was offered. I think it was like 2 months later, because I was like, surely she's not going to want to do any of these things. Like, surely she's not going to want to pray. Like, surely she's going to be mad at God. Surely she's going to be mad at the drunk driver. And she wasn't. And although that was so beautiful to me, because I was in mortal sin, like the devil twisted it. And he was like, see how you couldn't do this? See how you weren't strong enough? And I was so embarrassed and so ashamed at what I experienced. I was more like Peter, who ran from the cross, denied Jesus, didn't want anything to do with my cross. And my friend was, she was modeling the Blessed Mother. And so when she got back from Cursillo, she started a prayer group. I was like, this is so weird, because that wasn't my experience. And the only experience I had, and this was all before social media, before iPhones, when we lost Talon and Emma. So I really didn't have an inside view of what, the only view I had was my own. The only person that I knew that had lost a child was myself. I felt very isolated and alone. I felt it was a very weird experience. No one understood me. So when my friend lost her daughter, and I started going to this prayer group with her, because I thought I was going to help her, help my friend. But in actuality, what happened was she invited me to make my Cursillo. And I was still in this place of trying to deflect that. I was like, I can't make my Cursillo. I haven't made my confirmation. And I had another friend that she hadn't made her confirmation, but made Cursillo. And so she was like, that's a lie. She sold me out. And but what she said next was the change. It was the difference. What she said was, but if it's important to you, how about we join RCIA and make our confirmation together? No one had ever been willing to walk with me through that. Only people had suggested things for me to do and advice that they wanted to give.
Had never experienced accompaniment.
I never had experienced accompaniment.
So your friend, was willing to accompany you and go through the RCIA process with you so you could receive, the sacraments. And so you felt comfortable then living your Cursillo weekend.
Yeah, I felt comfortable because it didn't seem so scary for me. Before, everything was so scary because it was something that I was having to do by myself. And so having a friend, even though she was my friend Shandy, who I made confirmation with, was not a lost mom. She walked with me through that. And then my friend sponsored me for Cursillo. And so 2 months after I made my confirmation, I left to go make my Cursillo. And that was the first time that I'd ever encountered Christ in that capacity. Like, I felt completely ravaged. I think that Cursillo works because we never take the time for ourselves to walk hand in hand with God through the sacraments into sanctifying grace and receive sacraments on top of sacraments for that long of a time. And because I experienced this profound conversion, like the minute I got home, like I felt like I was floating. Well, Ryan says I was floating, my husband. And I put my arms around him and I was crying. And I told him I was so sorry. And he's such a good man. He told me, he said, "You were not that mean." I was like, "Yes, I was." I don't even know how you could say that. I was so mean. It wasn't just the grief. It was the unhealthy coping mechanisms that I was trying to cover the pain. We were both drinking, not every day, but like over drinking when we would drink. And so then, it causes you to say things that you would never say. It causes you to do things that you would never do. And that was the, I guess
so is that 2017?
2017, yes, is whenever I made my Cursillo.
Yeah.
And a year later, Ryan made his. And that was like when everything was right ordered and put back into the way that it was supposed to be.
And it's beautiful that you use that language about right ordered and the way it was supposed to be. And your story is an absolutely beautiful one because of the fact of there are those pinpoints of light that are present when we're able to look back and you can see God's hand at work. And it's so hard for us to be able to persevere in the midst of the darkness. So your patron saint for the ministries is Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and talk about someone who walked through darkness, but she herself was such a light to other people. And that's something that, I see you guys doing with Redbird Ministries, is it's coming out of, as you said, it's come out of your own pain. And now that everything, God is healed and things are right ordered, he's empowered you to go and to do this mission. And, but what is it that you and Ryan, what was it that caused you guys to say, okay, we need to share this with other people?
So about a year after I made Cursillo, right before Ryan made Cursillo, he went to the man-to-man conference and he was in confession. He hadn't been to confession since we got married, which was 15 years before that. And Father just asked him why. And so he went into the story of losing our twins. And it was a 45-minute confession for him. And at the end of it, the priest asked Ryan if we would be willing to go and share our testimony. He said he had 5 families the year before that had experienced the loss of a child, and he noticed that this unique group of individuals needed more than he could give. And that was a very humble thing for him to say, because I mean, they go to school for so long, so we think that they can do, all these things, but in reality, he felt really ill-equipped to be able to help these families. And he asked Ryan and I if we would to go share our witness. And I remember him telling us at dinner, he was like, I'm not asking y'all to start the ministry. He said, I'm just asking y'all to come to do a talk. And I was like, he might have not thought that, or we might have not thought that, but that's not what God had in mind.
Right.
And it started there. It just started as, okay, I'm going to make the commitment to go and share my talk one time.
Right.
But when I sat down to write that one talk, I realized there was so much that I had never said. So I sat down that day, and when I looked down, it was just I was like, this is not a talk. It was like an ungodly amount of pages. I was like, this is like a book. And so that's where the book first came to formulate, because I hadn't, in searching for resources through my own grief, I would find lots of books on suffering. I would find books on grief, but everything was always put together. It was you could, if you lost a parent, if you lost a spouse, even if you lost a dog. And I was like, nothing compares to losing your child. Not when you're deep in raw in grief. And I lost my mom too. And it was very painful for me. And I'm not saying that it's not, but it didn't destroy my life. When I lost Helen and Emma, it destroyed my life. I no longer was able to function in the capacity that I had been able to before. I've always been a natural go-getter, very independent, hard worker, have good work ethic, and I couldn't do anything. And it wasn't like I was telling you before when we lost Helen, it wasn't because I didn't believe that God exists. I just had a disordered view of who the father was. I really had an identity crisis. But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who God was. And so I had to restore that relationship, and it took longer than Cruceo's weekend. It really has been a 5-year process for me, rediscovering who I am. And every time I think that God's finished healing me, is another chapter he opens. So it's an everyday gift, I think, to be able to continue to heal myself and to walk with others in their journey.
And that is such a beautiful desire that you're expressing there, and it's so needed. So many people don't want to enter into anyone else's pain because they're afraid of what that might entail. And so for you to have that courage to be able to step out and to do that, and then to also invite others to be able to take their pain and to be able to accompany others and to be able to just simply share what your experience was, and to be present to one another. And that's exactly what Christ did, didn't he? That's exactly what he did, is that he was present. And then when we're present to one another, then his incredible healing is able to radiate through us to others. And so I want to make sure that we give a little bit of time to let people know about the work that Redbird Ministries is doing, about your hope but if people themselves wanted to be able to get some support, be able to reach out, how might they be able to do that? And what are some things that they might be able to find that you guys could help them with?
Yeah, so we really are a comprehensive grief support ministry for child loss. And so we do partner with dioceses and parishes to be able to provide the resources and the tools to implement grief support in their communities. But we also help families of loss virtually and in person here locally at our House of Grace in the Diocese of Lafayette, Louisiana. We have an online community that you can join by going to our website at redbird.love. We offer small groups, virtual small groups. We offer spiritual direction, and we have a couple spiritual directors who are also parents of loss. We have resources like my book. We have a consecration guide. It's a 33-day consecration guide to the Holy Family. It's called Restoring Love. And it's something couples can do in the privacy of their home. So you don't need to go to in-person support to do it. And the programs that we have for parishes and dioceses are two cornerstone programs that we have available as of now, or our grief group, which is called Finding the Passion of Christ in Our Story. And it's a 10-week journey through the Passion. So we look at Jesus's passion, his suffering and resurrection in the context of our own story. And we see how, like, Christ manifests his pain, his suffering, and his resurrection, and how that looks in our story as well. Because when I shared my story one time, someone told me that, and I was like, how could you ever think my story could ever compare to Jesus's? And then he was like, you need to go back and read the Passion. And when he did, I took those meditations that I wrote through Lent on my own journey and put it into a program. And it has other parts of it too. And you can do it as a grief study. It has questions. It has a leader's manual. It's a package program. And then we also have a one-day couples workshop. Same thing, leaders program, and it has a participant's guide that can be facilitated by a parish or diocese. And that is a one-day workshop that's offered. And the underlying, I guess, component of the couples workshop is so that couples can learn how to communicate. Because when couples can learn how to communicate in suffering, especially in their marriage, and the way that they grieve differently, the way that they process crisis differently, they can learn how to develop both emotional intimacy and also spiritual intimacy. So that's the underlying component of that. And then with the OSV Challenge money, we are developing our own app, which will come out at the beginning of 2022. Awesome. And we're working on our Good Shepherd program, and that is it's a educational resource for clergy to understand what families of loss go through and to know how to receive and support them after loss and escort them into the Redbird community. One of the obstacles that we were having is that families put their best face forward in front of their clergy. And so a lot of their priests didn't know that there was a problem until their marriages were about to fall apart. That's when we would reach out for support, and it was more reactive than proactive. So we want to prevent that, and we don't want to leave to make sense of loss up to the secular world. We really want the church to be the voice of grief, the voice of death, because Catholic worldview is it's different than what the secular world, says. Absolutely. Yes, grief has all kind of emotions. It brings apart a lot of things that happen to us in our body and our mind, but our soul is bigger. And I think a lot of times, like if you're not seeing a Catholic therapist, they only focus on the emotional, psychological part of it. They really don't talk about the spiritual and the relational side of it as well.
No, totally agree. The Catholic worldview, and it's a holistic one of where, this is where, you started our conversation, today with about the fact of, the ministry is been born out of your pain, and God continuously does that, of where he's, fulfilling what Paul wrote in Romans 8:28, God makes good things come out of bad for those who love him. And, oftentimes we can't see it because we're in such pain that we can't see the good that's coming. But then, that opportunity for us to be able to help others and to then accompany others. And through that, we become his instruments. And, Mother Teresa, Calcutta, your patron, said it so well about the fact of, we are the hands of Christ. We are the feet of Christ. We are the eyes of Christ. We are the ears of Christ. And by being present to one another, especially in the midst of our pains and our sufferings and our grief, that is where we truly become our best selves. So it's wonderfully exciting for me to hear about how you all saw the gap because of your own experience, but then you responded out of love, to help others. And that's such a beautiful and encouraging and inspiring story. But for the biggest reason is because it makes all of us, the body of Christ, better. So I definitely want to encourage everyone to go and check out what it is that you have to offer at redbird.love. And I'll put all of that in the show notes so that people can get in touch with you. And it's been such a joy to be able to hear your story and to learn of how it is that God has used you and your husband to bring about such good for other people. So thank you for your courage and your willingness to do that. And De Colores, I'm a fellow Siesta. Actually, we've come down to my husband and I, we've served on the regional service team, for Cursillo, and we actually have come down and done Cursillo de Cursillos, in the diocese there. And so it's a beautiful charism, and the essence of the charism, of course, is what you experienced with your friend who said, "Hey, I'll go and do this with you." And it's a charism of friendship. It's a charism of accompaniment. And that's what we're called to do, not to do anything more than just be present and to walk with one another. So thank you so much for your
Thank
time
you.
today, Kelly. And thanks everybody for listening. If you know of someone who is suffering, who is struggling right now with grief, especially with the loss of a child, please share this podcast with them. Let them know that there is hope, that there is, the presence of God in our midst, even when we can't see it. And he will work for the good of all of us who love him. So continue to do whatever it takes so that you may be able to continue to grow in holiness and become the living, breathing, wonder-working saint that God created you to be. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a blessed day.